Barrett, thank you for joining us. Welcome to If Prices Could Talk.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Happy to
Thank
have
you,
you.
Tracy. Yes.
So Barrett, for people watching, Barrett is the VP of Customer and Industry Relations at Zilliant. Zilliant is friend of ours, friend of the firm. Why don't we do a little bit about what Zilliant does? Maybe you can give us a little intro and then we'll move into agenda items.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Zilliant is a software provider, and we're focused exclusively on B2B pricing. And we enable and automate the full pricing lifecycle for B2B.
So I've got like a couple chunks of concepts that we thought would be good to get into. The first one, I just have this note that's CPQ is broken. So that's the headline for our first chat. Obviously, Jeet and Barrett go way back. Do you want to say anything about that, Jeet?
Zilliant, we evaluated when I was in industry back in 2001 or so. We evaluated Zilliant along with other providers, but for our environment, which was a low margin, high transaction environment, Zilliant had the best sort of algorithm for us to deploy. And we deployed price optimization, and they were fantastic to work with. And it was early days of Zilliant as well. This is before their cloud transformation. I think we both had mutually beneficial relationship of developing some of the key components of the product while us testing out certain things. And it was just a lot of fun to be part of that early stages of development and testing and frankly, a lot of success. It's been a great relationship over the years.
Yeah, you were an early adopter and, took a risk on a new technology in a way that people weren't even sure. Can you actually bring benefit to B2B pricing with the approach, the optimization approach? But we did, we proved it, and now we've scaled it. So thank you, Jeet, for your role in that in the early days.
Yeah, it was mutual for sure.
So for people that aren't familiar, I think a lot of the people that listen to our podcast are pricers. For people that are more on the general business side, can we just do like a statement of the obvious of what is CPQ, high level, if in case anybody's listening that they don't know?
Let's take the three letters: configure, price, and quote. It's that sales activity that happens when customer meets rep, let's say, and we want to put together what is essentially an order, a draft order. And if we can come to agreement, we're going to push the button and submit that and get the fulfillment happening. So that's a pretty important stage. For many years, that was happening in Excel, frankly. It was happening on the fax machine before that, all sorts of ways. Someone just memorizing it in their head. You want 1,000 of those and 500 of those as they took the phone call, rolling down the highway. But business saw an opportunity to automate that and put in a system to standardize that. So configure if the product needs that, or select it from the catalog if you don't, put a price on it, and then get that quote flowing for approval and fulfillment. What would you add to that, Jeet?
Nothing. I think that's a good one. I think the only thing that I see with our clients that gets sometimes confused is how does that differ from price optimization, right? So if we look at the P portion of it, you've got sort of, it was always, even when we were installing Zilliant, it was an education for the company for us to go through and go, there's price management and then there's price optimization. Those are two separate things. And then there's price execution, and you have to compartmentalize those things a little bit because those are different processes, different people sometimes, different execution forms. And so, talk to us a little bit, Barrett, about those kind of components so we can isolate the P and get into what Tracy was talking about, which is why we feel like the P in CPQ is broken.
Yes, I appreciate that. I think, and this is somewhat a simplistic view, but on purpose. If you look inside CPQ, what we often see for the P is a price book. That's the simplest thing. I've got a catalog, every item's in the catalog, and there's a price there. And maybe there is more than one price book, so that I could begin to think about, well, how would I price in one region versus another region where I'm selling? And there might even be some logic for quantity breaks, right? The kinds of things that make sense. But what the CPQ is expecting is that someone else has done the heavy work of figuring out what should be the price difference in region A versus region B. Where should the quantity breaks live, and how much discount should be assigned to each of those quantity tiers? So I think the price book, the pricing in CPQ, what I've observed is it's mostly serving a lookup function. Just go grab a price on the assumption that the price is right, that the price is granular, that the price conforms to all of the things you're trying to do, all the details you're trying to manage in the CPQ. I think what I've observed, CPQ has been massively important and attractive over the last 10 years. A lot of people have rushed into CPQ. A lot of money has been spent. Many, many CPQ systems have been stood up. And I would say on the C part, the configuration where that's needed, and the downstream quoting part, getting customer-facing docs and sending that off to ERP, the C and the Q, I would say as a class, CPQ solutions are serving those needs really well. But I think they miss a huge part of what the B2B pricing team does when it comes to P. They can execute on a price once determined, but how do you determine that price? And that's where I've seen a gap and where I think there's more to talk about. What are you seeing in your customers? Do they acknowledge that kind of gap? Or did their senior leadership think that they were filling that gap when they bought CPQ because it has pricing in the name?
It's interesting, Barrett. I think like most things, transformation happens from the customer facing, then upstream. So I feel like CPQ was the first sort of technology to enter as a pricing tech stack, one of the first ones, because ERP was first, then CPQ kind of followed right by it. CRM was there also.
Yes.
They're customer facing. The closer you are to customers, I think the more priority companies put on fixing certain issues and problems. So I think that's why quoting got fixed quickly. Configuration got fixed quickly to make the operators more efficient, things like that. With the pricing, I think it's lagging behind. Even in 2024, it's lagging behind. And the reason I think it's lagging behind is because people, first of all, think pricing should be market-based. They don't think about value. They don't think about all the other things that go into price. They just think it's market-based. So what's the best way to do market-based pricing? The easiest way to do it is to say, what did I price in the last 6 months, in the last 12 months? That's my price. That's my starting off, because I'm not really wrong if I priced it like I did last year, So, and then executives go, hey, can we raise prices? And somebody goes, I think I can get 20 basis points, 40 basis points. Let me tweak that up and see what happens. So that becomes the pricing function all of a sudden, and it lacks the intelligence. And for us, the way we are thinking about it at Holden is, prices get stale. And the reason prices get stale is because your value drivers, the reason your customers are buying from you is changing all the time. If the reasons they're buying for you is changing, if your competitors are coming up with different services and products, if the market itself is changing, inventory levels are changing, all this stuff is changing, why is your price book not changing?
Right.
Why is that static? And you're trying to cover that up by artificially raising or lowering price. You're covering that up by fixing the quoting system. You're covering that by fixing the configure system, but you're not fixing the actual problem, which is, how did you get to that list price? Did you take all the attributes that are important in how a customer makes a decision to set that initial price? And do you have a process that's a closed loop process to keep your pricing fresh? And the answer, obviously, in most cases, is going to be a big no.
Right. I can validate that. And it's, in hindsight now, it's sort of easy to spot when that's going on. If you ask a pricing team, what are the things that you should be doing or you imagine that you're doing when you're trying to manage your price? And they'll say, well, I want to take all of the relevant data, pull it together in a central place. Maybe that's transactional data, forward-looking forecast of cost, market index, any sort of thing, competitive price. They want to pull all the right data together. They want to conduct an analysis. They want to figure out what the value of different drivers are in the marketplace. They want to use that to create prices that they might want to put in the market. They want to explore what would be the revenue and profit impact of those prices if I were to go with them, and then publish those right into the business. And so when we ask them, where are you doing these things today? Where are you pulling the data, making the analysis, proposing a price adjustment, predicting the impact? The answer is never, I'm doing that inside of my CPQ tool. Never. In fact, the hidden secret is, I'm still doing all of that in Excel.
Yeah.
Okay. The quote itself might not be flowing in Excel as an email attachment between the sales team and the customer and the pricing team, but my task of figuring out what the price points should be
Yeah.
is happening in Excel. And then after some period of time, months or quarters, you want to look back and judge how well is my price program performing? What are the KPIs around price? How, there again, you say, where are you getting that information? Where are you doing your analysis on the program, looking for problems or opportunities you want to address in the future? The answer has not been, well, inside of CPQ. CPQ doesn't have these capabilities. So that's why I say CPQ is broken when it comes to price, because it's leaving so much of the heavy lifting and the deep analytical work that all B2B companies are doing or aspire to do. They're leaving it outside of the solution. So CPQ needs a complement.
Yeah.
And it's Zilliant acquired a CPQ a couple of months ago. And so why does that make sense? And other pricing companies have the same. That's a complete end-to-end solution. When you're able to take all the relevant data, create the price, judge what the price would do on your business, make sure you like where that's steering the P&L, and then publish that price so it gets right down to the front line and meets the customer interface, as you said. So I think you're right. The business world started by creating a better customer interface experience, more efficient between customer and seller. And now they're looking upstream and saying, but what else do I need to make that a profitable transaction, to make that a satisfying transaction? And I think to do some other things in business too. Price has the opportunity to raise unit profits, yes, but it can also change other dynamics in the buying and selling relationship.
Barrett, are you suggesting that the update or the analytics that go to optimize your list price, your price book, let's say, should live within CPQ, or do you think it's going to be a add-on to CPQ where you do the analytics, you do the setting, and you push the setting into a traditional CPQ system?
I think it's going to sit beside.
Okay.
And there are a couple of reasons. I mean, there's such purpose-built capabilities in the pricing solutions that sit beside CPQ. Another thing that I think it takes a while for the penny to drop until someone just says it. Like, CPQ doesn't routinely see the kind of data that you need to do your price analysis, for example. Most CPQs don't have visibility to 2 or 3 years worth of transaction data. Could be 10 million order lines that you fulfilled over that period if you're a high volume distributor. It's very expensive to store that in CPQ. CPQ doesn't look at it, doesn't know what to do with it. It wasn't built to create the kind of analytic sandbox and platform that the pricing team needs to go in and do their what if scenarios side by side. So we see it as a complementary solution. Let the P, most of the analytics and determination of P, live inside of your purpose-built pricing tool. And then you can decide, well, how do I get the final prices into CPQ? You might load them as a price book, but in some cases, the kinds of differentiation you want to use on the price, I want to differentiate by size of order, customer industry, region, how many years they've been a customer, whether the product is high or low velocity. The price book might not be able to handle that kind of dimensionality. So it might be mechanically impossible to put the price book there, but there's a simple answer. Just set up an API call. Let the CPQ just call the pricing system and say, here's the situation I'm facing. Tell me what the price is. And the pricing tools, they have all this detail and the granularity that's required. They'll just deliver back the unit price.
Yeah.
Like for you, Jeet, from a dynamic value driver perspective, how do you see that sync up or could be designed in the future and kind of?
That's a great question. I was actually going to go exactly there. So Barrett, one of the things that you mentioned one factor of setting that price, which is historical understanding and analysis, right? There's the other factor, which is more real time of what's happening at the quote level, what's happening from quote to order. What are the units? How are the units performing? How are the prices performing? What's the negotiation level? Are there other market factors? Are there other things that are driving softness in some verticals and then more revenue in other verticals? Like all of those components of the more real time of a high transaction count environment, including inventory position, channel positions, things like that. All of that information from an architecture perspective, do you believe that all of that information needs to go back into CPQ, or do you think that goes back into something else?
So we hear customers ask often, can I use my inventory and my competitor's inventory position? For instance, can I use the competitor made a price move, yesterday? How am I going to respond to that? I totally support the idea of having a dynamic price response. I feel like the right place to keep that is in the pricing solution. I think CPQ is not necessarily a great place to store that or analyze it. What CPQ also feeds us is an important factor, which is your own win-loss experience, right? That's something that CPQ provides that we don't see. That you think, so we want to take that information from CPQ, but I think the analytical powerhouse is going to live outside of CPQ and maybe see and touch data streams and data sources that CPQ is not in touch with and maybe can't easily be put in touch with.
Yeah,
that's how we look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard pricing software companies nowadays talk about real-time pricing, and having worked with some of the pricing optimization solutions that are out there, it's really tough to do real-time pricing when you talk about the amount of transactions that some of these companies have, right? If you have small number of transactions, you've got small amount of historic information, limited segments, customer segments. I could totally see real-time pricing be something that we can deploy. But in a very complex environment, along with the size of data and information from transactions you're getting on an hourly basis, I think it's tough to run some of those calculations. Tell me a little bit about where you guys are at and how you're tackling that problem.
I think you're right that if we imagine that we have to rerun a calculation, it can be expensive to do so, and maybe the data is not available in all industries to sort of drive that in a real-time basis. But there are other approaches to real-time pricing that maybe sidestep that problem a little bit. Imagine, for example, that what we ask the price optimizer to determine is how my selling price should be calibrated to a public market index, some commodities for a chemical. I'm a chemicals distributor. And the question is, should I be 3% above the commodities index for a given customer in a given volume, or 4% or 4.2%? If we've optimized that number on Monday, and now it's Tuesday, the calculation could be as straightforward as, where is the index today? I already know that I want to be 4.2% above the index. So as the index moves, it's a very straightforward calculation to decide what 4.2% above the index is. And that would be a reasonable way to think about a real-time price. I didn't recalculate the 4.2% by studying something, but I used it riding on top of other inputs. An example, we were mentioning inventory. It might be the same thing. I might have determined that either by policy or by data science, when my inventory position is low, I want to take whatever prevailing market price I normally get and go up by 1%, right? Because there's kind of a scarcity at the moment. On the other hand, when it's high, inventory high, perhaps I go down by a little bit. And so that the reference point from which I'm going up or down might be a number that I computed at the beginning of the week, or I computed at the beginning of the day. I might not need to recompute that reference 8 times throughout the 8-hour business day, but I can ask the inventory question every hour. Where am I on inventory? And then use that signal as a way to modulate up or down. So that is, in my mind, a legitimate real-time pricing. The price is moving according to external conditions that are changing at a high rate of speed, but I'm not necessarily trying to go back to my analytic engine and ask it for a different number. I might have a more straightforward computational way to apply those changing inputs to get a changing price output.
That's great. So that makes sense to me. So your list price optimization still would be weekly, monthly, whatever it is, your cadences, the heavy analytics, and then you would kind of post-processing, you would manage it through some of these other smaller calculations based on whatever your business needs are. That's reflective of your price needing to change. So those dynamic value drivers that are causing that customer to make different changes, then you can use those as indicators to update your pricing in real time.
That's right. I think that's one way, and that's a practical way. Now,
Yeah.
as compute speed increases and the amount of repeat runs of the core algorithm, the core optimizer can be done with greater and greater speed. It might be the case that you do a calculation every time you need a price quote, but today calculations are done in advance. Then they can be stored and then they can be adjusted in real time with some of these external signals that we're talking about. And I think that makes a very practical solution.
Yeah, that's great.
Certainly a step up above the static price, that you put in beginning of the month or
Yeah.
beginning of the quarter, for goodness sake, and live with that. That's so 1980s. Can't be doing that anymore, right?
I like that.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about time, maybe this is a good time, Tracy. What do you think, to transition to speak a little bit about time, right?
Yeah.
Barrett, I this notion of time and time savings is something that's really at the top of my brain right now, because it seems like, especially with AI and especially with our compute power, the where it is, there's an opportunity for us to save time, and it's sort of a two sides to the same coin kind of thing, because I feel like if I extrapolate out in my head to the effects of AI, the effects of compute, I feel like consumers are going to make decisions faster because they'll have relevant information in their fingertips quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they make decisions faster. I feel like the purchase decision cycle is getting shorter and will get shorter and shorter and shorter, which
Yeah.
means if I regress that back to the next level of suppliers, the next level of manufacturers, everybody has to work faster. So time becomes an extremely expensive unit of measure all of a sudden, more so than before.
All right.
And so anything we can do to save time, make decisions faster, especially at the point of transaction, make smarter, better, faster decisions. That fast component becomes more and more important. So what are kind of your thoughts around that? And tell me a little bit about how Zilliant's thinking about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Back when you were my customer years ago, we sold to you.
Yeah.
I can imagine what the value pitch was at the time. Hey, let's go get an extra 100 to 300 basis points in gross margin or something like that, right? And by the way, that's proven across decades. It's achievable. Pricing solutions do this all day long. But emerging more and more is another really important benefit, and it's the speed that you're speaking about. So one of our customers a few years back, a manufacturer of hydraulic components, they had an amazing impact. They took their total time, the turnaround time to get a quote, it was about 4 days was their average. And through the use of price optimization, sort of shortening what it means to go figure out what the right price should be. Let me back up. How do many businesses do this today? They wait for the quote to hit the door, and then they scramble the jets to do their analysis. Oh my goodness, let's go pull in the data, get all the people on a phone, have a conference call, figure out what the price should be. And they do all of their analytical work just in time, quote by quote. That's killing them. Price optimization flips that on its head. It says, well, let's go figure out what the price will be for every theoretical combination of quote you might ever see, ever, even though 1% of those combinations are going to show up, right? But the computer will just compute all of the numbers. And then when you actually encounter a quote, all I have to do is go fetch the price, maybe do a real-time adjustment on it. So it took a lot of time out of the quoting cycle. So this hydraulics customer took their quote turnaround time from 4 days to a day and a half. It's about a 62% reduction. And yes, those prices also gave them greater unit margin. So their gross margins were up a little bit. Yay for pricing. But they came back and said, guess what happened to our win rates? They measured this. The win rate on their quotes went from 6% to 40%.
Wow.
Gee, that's a 6x increase in wins.
Yeah.
Right? That is astounding. So even at the same margin levels, the revenue dollars and the profit dollars that flow out of being fast are tremendous. Customers want it, need it. And I hear these anecdotes sometimes. I've had customers come back when I ask them, how long does it take for you to do a quote? And they say 5 days, 6 days, 7 days. And then we ask, do you ever lose a quote because you were the last one or you were too late to the party? And about half the time I hear yes. I get back to the customer and they say, thank you very much for playing. Appreciate all that hard work that you did scrambling to get these numbers for me and sharpening the pencil. I gave the order to your competitor 2 days ago because they replied in a timely way. So this speed matters, and it matters for winning. And it matters so much that I think it has just as much impact on top line and bottom line as what we imagine is the incremental lift coming from a better price. So that's a big dimension of time.
Do you think people just don't realize that, or what do you think is the underlying issue that people either don't connect those dots, or they don't know it's possible, or they don't know the impact? Like, what do you think is the problem now that maybe it's just the focus is all on margin?
I think to a degree, maybe even the pricing companies have focused on margin. We've seen that as the primary, maybe the sole benefit. And it might also just be sort of status quo, Tracy, that B2B has been operating with a certain cadence for decades, and it seemed to work well enough. And like the world is accelerating so fast that the idea that I need to take my quotes from 5 days with somebody that I play golf with all the time. I mean, come on, I've been giving them 5-day quotes forever, and that's always good enough. How could I possibly lose from a new customer who says, I need your answer in 24 hours? And I'm ready to push the button and make the decision and get it done. Anytime, anywhere, and fast is sort of what the new B2B buyer is looking for. So I think it's just a new expectation. And maybe the pricing team wasn't really thinking about this. I think sales ops is thinking a lot about cycle time, but there's a missed connection that pricing, in addition to having a margin rate lift, can have a huge impact on cutting out a large piece of the cycle time in quoting if done properly. And so there's an opportunity there for people to think about.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think, Tracy, fundamentally to your question is a lot of this cycle time is baked into their numbers already. So as long as they're not changing that cycle time, they're not feeling anything. They're feeling margins coming down. They feel margins going up. So they can feel that. But if your cycle time's always been the same and it's not fundamentally changing, then everything is status quo. Everything is all right. You're moving all the other variables that affect your profitability. The question is, this is a human behavior question, right? So even at my old company, we figured out if an open quote is touched more than 3 times. So if a customer comes, opens up a quote, that quote is in the system. If you just email the customer, and if you call the customer, if you touch that quote 3 times, so email, call, whatever, however you want to digitally touch the customer, it has a 3x probability of closure than before. So those are just normal human behavior, because the customer sometimes forgets they're also in a high transaction environment. They forget that they kind of opened up a quote to look at price and availability, and they're kind of moving on to other projects, other things. And then if they get an email, they go, oh yeah, that's right. You know what? I'm running out of time. Let me just buy what these guys are doing right now. And there's a higher probability of closure. So those human things, I don't think is quite picked up. And Barrett, you said something that I wholeheartedly believe that I think is so important, which is sales ops has these metrics for success, which is what are my open quotes? How do I close it? How do I become more efficient? All of those things. Awesome organization, really good metric driven, probably organization that's there behind salespeople. And they're sort of the powerhouse of all of these types of things. That disconnect with the pricing team, I think, is enormous. I think those need to start coming together, because I think pricing teams have to move more towards digital marketing, digital sort of demand generation. And it's kind of the push-pull, right? And then the sales ops team have to connect in. And that process needs to be tied together. That goes not just the P, but the C is there, the Q is there. It's the demand gen that's there. All of it needs to come together in orchestration and not just look at one variable to optimize.
Right. Jeet, that makes me think that recently I've sort of reconnected with an idea that I think might be the bridge for pricing people to take as an entry into the sales ops side of the world and say, I've got some value I can bring. Let's talk about it. And it's an extension on this time thing. We talked about shortening the quote cycle time and how great that is for the customer and win rate. But when we shorten that time for the customer, we also shorten it for folks inside of the seller's business. And
Yeah.
let's think about the sales rep, for instance.
Yeah.
I don't have hard stats on this, but anecdotally, I am convinced that every B2B seller is spending, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 hours a week in internal work. I'll call it busy work, unnecessary busy work, but today it's essential, trying to figure out what should the price be on this quote, or debating and arguing with a category manager, or going back to the pricing team with a mother may I request for your, the price discount you want to give. What if all of those hours, what if 5 hours a week could be given back to every sales rep, because they don't have to do that anymore? The pricing solution has determined what the right price is in consideration of all of the factors that matter. Management has been able to see the profit and revenue impacts of the price guidance that's going into market, and they've agreed with that. So it's all pre-approved discounts. This idea that I have to figure out what the price is and then ask someone else to say yes. What if all that goes away because we all agree beforehand on what the right price is for every selling circumstance I'm going to face? And that's what's being served up in my quoting tool. Suddenly a rep has 5 hours a week. That's 12.5% more bandwidth. And I'm going to make a generous assumption that instead of just going to play golf, that their management says, let's use that 12.5% to go expand inside of existing customers, go recruit a new great customer into the portfolio. That's 12% more selling capacity without adding headcount. And I think if you ask any sales executive, what is the commission that's put on them every year? They're like, gee, you have to grow sales by 5% or 3% or 10%, but we're not giving you resources in the same proportion. So this is a huge windfall to the sales side of the house to get back hours in their week to go do higher value added activities. They may not be the only ones, but those are the ones that I think it's a tremendous story there is not being told.
I remember I used to do ride-alongs with my sales organization every year, basically, to kind of understand how they understand customer needs, how they build sort of their plans with those customers, how they quote, what does that look like, all of those things. And what I noticed was there's a 30 to 60, it's a wide band, 30 to 60% of their time on any given week is spent on fixing some problem or fixing some back-end issue with their customer. 30 to 60%. It's improper pricing on a quote. It's missing orders. It's working with their ops team. It's internal selling. My customer can't pay that much high price. All of these things that I would call inefficiency. And the reason I would call it inefficiency is exactly what you said, which is the opportunity cost. 30 to 60% of my salespeople means I am understanding less about my customers now. I am giving my customer less attention now because I'm kind of fixing some of these broken processes in my mind in the back end, that I'm not devoting that time to really understanding what drives my customer to buy from me. I can't ask them those questions if I'm spending all that time in the back end. I do think that's a huge value add that people need to think about as they employ these software solutions.
Yeah, agreed. And so when pricing is looking for a way to team up or get some buy-in or even just some interest from sales ops, talk to them about how you can give hours back every week to every sales rep. That's a huge dividend. They're at least going to be curious, curious enough to say, tell me more about that. And then that's your chance to talk about compressing the entire cycle and doing it by figuring out all the pricing ahead of time and not debating it deal by deal, and spending all of your effort just in time.
It also just leads back to what you were saying earlier about increased win rates.
Mm-hmm.
And then enter AI, but that's for another day, I suppose.
I was just going to say that. I was like, well, there's that whole topic of AI. Speaking of time, right? There's the whole topic of artificial intelligence, but maybe we'll save that for our next visit by Barrett.
I have some ideas to share with you. I hope that your audience will find them interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been great. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you at Mindshare.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Jeet. I look forward to seeing you in Austin in a few weeks.
I can't wait. I'm excited. I'm really excited.
All right. Thanks, Barrett. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.